topic we're going to talk about today, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. Under the Act, it is the employer's responsibility to maintain accurate and reliable time and pay records. So if your time records are not reliable, then it's your responsibility as the business owner, and some inferences can be made against you because they're not reliable. So think of a situation like this. You have an hourly worker that says, you know what, I worked off the clock, and my assistant manager told me to work off the clock. And I worked off the clock probably a half hour every day. That was the standard practice. So if they're claiming they worked off the clock, your time records aren't going to show that. So you better have some other policies and practices in place to overcome that. For instance, you can have a policy in your employee handbook that says no employee is allowed to work off the clock. If they do work off the clock, or an assistant manager or anyone tells them to work off the clock, they should report it to the next level up. You should have the employees review their time records at the end of each week or whatever your pay period is, and give them an opportunity to report any inaccuracies so that you can pay them what they're owed. What you can't do is, even if you have that policy in place that says all employees are not allowed to work off the clock, if you in fact find out that an employee worked off the clock, they did work, you need to pay them for that time, even though it's against company policy. You can discipline them for not following company policy, but you have to pay them for all hours worked. So in that explanation, I gave two examples of where employers sometimes make mistakes: keeping accurate time records and not paying employees their overtime or their wages because they violated company policy. That is a mistake. A third mistake is you don't want to have a company policy written in a handbook that says if you work unauthorized overtime, we will not pay you. That is just an admission of liability that's in writing that will be put up as Exhibit 1 into the courtroom. You do not want to have a policy like that. Another mistake with hourly employees would be now looking at the pay practices. And with pay practices, some mistakes get into calculating the regular rate of pay, because you need to know the regular rate of pay in order to determine out what time and 1/2 time is. And where some employers get mistakes on that is not knowing how to treat production bonuses, thinking that all bonuses are the same, and it's a bonus, so it shouldn't be calculated into my wages. That's not true. Some bonuses are considered wages that must be included in the calculation of the regular rate of pay so that you can determine the overtime pay. Those types of bonuses are called production bonuses. And a production bonus can be explained simply as, if you do X, I will pay you Y. And if the employee does X, they're paid Y. That's something that should be calculated as part of their regular rate of pay and in determining their overtime pay. A completely discretionary bonus, meaning it's not conditioned on the employee satisfying certain things or certain criteria. It's just within the complete discretion of the employer whether or not you're going to give bonuses to employees, then that is not considered wages. There are other factors in considering whether something is a production bonus or a discretionary bonus, and that's where a mistake is made, thinking something's a discretionary bonus when in fact it's a production bonus. A common misperception is, I pay my employee a salary, therefore they're not entitled to overtime pay. I pay them a salary. Well, earlier on in this video or in this Q&A, you heard me say that a salary is just one factor for an exemption. If you don't have the other criteria satisfied, meaning you don't take deductions from the salary, the employees are actually performing the exempt duties. If those criteria are not met, you can pay someone a salary, but that doesn't make them exempt. And then when you're looking at that issue, you have a salaried employee who's not exempt, and usually their rate of pay is going to be at a significant amount that your failure to pay them the overtime wages can add up to a significant amount quickly. Since we're talking about salaries here, I want to talk about another issue with a salary. Say you have a non-exempt employee, so this is an employee that is entitled to overtime pay. You pay that employee a salary. Now, there are two types of salary compensation structures. One's considered a fixed salary. I'm paying you $40,000 a year, and for that, it's expected that you will work 40 hours a week. That's a fixed salary structure. Versus a fluctuating work week, which means common description would be, I'm paying you $40,000 a year, and as part of that salary, you're going to work 50, 60, 30, 20 hours a week. Regardless of the number of hours a week you work, you are going to get paid $40,000 a year. If you have a fixed salary or a fluctuating work salary, how that salary is then turned into a regular rate of pay and then calculated into overtime rate differs. When looking at these different structures, if you're an employer that's facing a situation where you have to look at paying an employee unpaid wages because you thought they were a salaried employee, so that made them exempt, you didn't pay them overtime. They're coming at you with a claim for unpaid wages, and when you're determining the amount that you owe them, it's going to differ greatly whether it's a fixed salary or a fluctuating work week. I'm going to prepare a written summary of these calculations so you can see them side by side, and then you can see the difference of the math and how it adds up, and that will be available on my website. Another area where employers make mistakes is in misclassifying someone as exempt when they're really not exempt, or misclassifying someone as an independent contractor when they're really an employee. Because now when you look at those cases, you're treating someone as exempt, so that means that you weren't paying them their overtime wages. And if they are really non-exempt, they're entitled to their overtime pay. And you look at the whole class of positions. So say you have 10 employees who are assistant managers, and one of the employees brings a claim or they're not performing exempt duties. That doesn't just affect that one employee, it affects every employee in that class of employees. It would affect all 10 of the assistant managers. And with independent contractors, there's also that same implication. You're treating someone as an independent contractor, not an employee. Well, in addition to not paying them overtime pay, you're probably not paying payroll or other types of taxes on them. And that is problematic. And one of the reasons why it's problematic is you have the Department of Labor interested in people who do that. You have the IRS interested in finding people or employers who do that. And you have the employees interested in coming after you because they want to get paid. Hopefully you're watching this on my YouTube page. You'll see a video up or down on this. There is a whole talk on whether or not someone's an independent contractor or an employee. If you can't find it on the YouTube page, it's also on my website. Because of the initiative of the Department of Labor, the IRS, the different liability risks you have of misclassifying someone, it's really important that you get this right. To bring together the issues that I talked about and to highlight how some employers or business owners make mistakes with the Fair Labor Standards Act, I prepared a little quiz, a true and false questions. I'll be asking the questions and the answers are either true or false. Number 1. I don't have to worry about overtime because I pay all my employees salaries. Number 2. Falsa schmalsha. All my workers are independent contractors because I make them sign an independent contractor agreement. That's all I need. Number 3. Look, I'm a small business owner and my employees understand that. When we get busy, they volunteer to work extra hours. Because they volunteer this time, I don't have to pay them wages for their volunteer time. Number 4, our employee handbook specifically says that no employee may work unauthorized overtime. Therefore, when an employee works unauthorized overtime, I do not have to pay them overtime pay for these hours. They violated company policy. Number 5, when my employees make certain identified goals, I pay them a bonus. Because this is a bonus, it does not affect my employees' regular wages or overtime wages. Number 6, so what if my business gets sued? If the employee wins, I can just close the business. I have no personal liability or risk because the business is a corporation. All 6 statements that I read, the answers are false. If you answer true to any of those questions, you may be facing some overtime issues within your workplace. If you have any questions with regard to these true or false statements or as to why they're false, I encourage you to review and look at your overtime practices and policies. If you have any questions, feel free to look at my website or to call me. So my recommendation as to what employers should or should not do include, do not guess on the overtime laws. If you don't know whether or not your employee is exempt or non-exempt, if you don't know whether or not your business is covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act or whether or not your employee is covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act, seek the advice of someone who does. Don't be fast and loose with your time and pay practices. If you find out that one of your assistant managers is telling employees to work off the clock, you need to address that situation quickly. You need to talk to your assistant manager. You need to figure out whether or not that's true, find out the amount of hours that were actually worked, and then find a way to pay the employees what they're entitled under the law. So although there are defenses to overtime claims, and there are strategies that employers can do to minimize their liability, they can't minimize the amount that the employee is owed for all hours they actually worked in excess of 40 hours. Meaning if it's proven, or once it's established that an employee worked so many hours of overtime each week, and if it's proven that that employee is exempt, the amount of overtime pay is going to be what they're entitled to. You're not going to be able to reduce that. But by resolving it quickly, you may be able to reduce the amount of attorney's fees that you pay. You may be able to reduce the collateral damage of other employees going to file lawsuits with employees. So I guess basically you always have to comply with the law, and how you do it and how you address situations where you find that you were not in compliance can help minimize your overall cost in the long run.